The dust devils danced across the Colorado Trail like ghosts in the late afternoon sun, and Lena McCall watched them with eyes that had forgotten how to cry. Her boots, once decent leather, were split at the seams, each step grinding sand between her toes. The wagon that had carried her this far was nothing but a speck on the horizon now, disappearing into the heat shimmer along with any hope she'd harbored of finding work in Denver. Mrs. Harriet Pemberton had made sure of that. The woman's shrill voice still echoed in Lena's ears. "Thief! You dare steal from me after I took you in!" The accusation had come out of nowhere that morning, just as they'd stopped to water the horses. A silver hairpin. Mrs. Pemberton claimed, had gone missing from her jewelry box. Never mind that Lena had been scrubbing pots in the back of the wagon when it supposedly disappeared. Never mind that she'd worked for the Pembertons for 3 months without so much as taking an extra biscuit. The driver, old Samuel, had looked at her with something like pity when Mrs. Pemberton ordered her off the wagon. He'd started to speak up, but Mr. Pemberton's sharp glance had silenced him. So Lena had climbed down with what little dignity remained to her, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the $2 silver she'd saved from her wages Mrs. Pemberton had snatched back, claiming them as compensation for the stolen pin. That had been 6 hours ago, maybe 7. Time moved strangely in the desert, marked only by the sun's brutal arc overhead and the growing ache in her legs. The trail stretched endlessly in both directions, worn smooth by countless wagon wheels but offering no comfort to her blistered feet. Sagebrush and stubby juniper dotted the landscape, their shadows growing longer as evening approached. Lena's dress, a simple brown calico that had been respectable that morning, now hung limp with sweat and dust. Her hair, which she'd pinned up neatly at dawn, had come loose hours ago. Strands stuck to her neck and face, matted with grime. She could feel the grit between her teeth, taste the alkali dust that coated everything in this god-forsaken stretch of territory. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the silence. Lena watched it wheel against the sky and wondered if it was waiting for her to fall. The thought should have frightened her, but she was beyond fear now, settled into a dull determination to keep walking until she couldn't anymore. What else was there to do, die standing still? The sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that might have been beautiful if she'd had the luxury of appreciating them. Instead, each deepening shadow brought new worry. She'd heard the stories back in Kansas City, before she'd taken the position with the Pembertons, stories of what happened to women alone in the wilderness, bandits, Indians, wild animals, the desert itself, which could kill you with thirst as easily as anything else. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. The last water she'd had was at the morning stop, a hasty gulp from the barrel while helping to prepare breakfast. Mrs. Pemberton had always been particular about servants drinking too much, claiming it made them lazy. Lena would have laughed at that now if she'd had the moisture to spare. A coyote yipped somewhere in the distance, answered by another, then another. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms despite the lingering heat. She'd seen what coyotes could do to a sheep that strayed from the flock back on the farm where she'd grown up. They weren't usually bold enough to attack a grown person, but desperation made all creatures dangerous. And what was she, if not desperate? The trail dipped into a shallow ravine, and Lena stumbled on the loose rocks. Her ankle twisted, sending a spike of pain up her leg. She caught herself against a boulder, breathing hard. The stone still held the day's warmth, and she leaned against it for a moment, closing her eyes. "Get up," she whispered to herself. "Get up, Lena Marie." Using her full name like her mother used to, it was a trick to make herself feel less alone. But her mother was 2 years in the ground, and there was no one left who cared whether Lena Marie McCall lived or died on this trail. She pushed off from the boulder and limped on. The ravine offered some shelter from the wind that had begun to pick up, but it also blocked her view of the horizon. Anything could be waiting around the next bend. Anyone. The coyotes called again, closer now. Lena picked up a stick, though what good it would do against a pack of hungry animals she couldn't say. It made her feel better to have something in her hand, some illusion of defense. Night fell faster than she'd expected, the way it did in the high desert. One moment there was light enough to see the trail. The next, she was stumbling in purple twilight. Stars began to appear, brilliant in the clear air, but they offered no comfort. If anything, they made her feel smaller, more insignificant, a speck of nothing in an endless expanse of nothing. She nearly walked past the rock formation. It was just another jumble of sandstone in a landscape full of them. But something about the way the rocks leaned together caught her eye. A shallow cave, really more of an overhang, but it would keep her back protected and give her something solid to lean against. Lena crawled into the space, wincing as her knees scraped against the sandy ground. The stick she'd been carrying became her probe, poking into the darker corners to check for rattlesnakes or scorpions. Finding nothing, she curled herself into the smallest ball possible, back pressed against the stone. The coyotes howled again, a chorus now. They sounded like they were celebrating, and perhaps they were. The desert was their domain, after all. She was just another piece of prey that had wandered into their territory. "I won't die here," she said aloud, needing to hear a human voice even if it was her own. "I won't give her the satisfaction." Mrs. Pemberton would probably tell people she'd run off, paint her as a thief who'd fled justice. The thought burned worse than the blisters on her feet. 3 months of spotless service, of yes ma'am and no ma'am, and suffering every indignity with a smile, all thrown away over a hairpin she'd never even seen. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but it was the thirst that tormented her most. Every swallow reminded her of how dry her throat had become. She thought of the water barrel on the Pemberton wagon, of clear streams back in Missouri, of anything wet and cool. Something rustled in the brush nearby. Lena gripped her stick tighter, straining to see in the darkness. The moon hadn't risen yet, and the starlight wasn't enough to penetrate the shadows. She held her breath, listening. Footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps that might have been human or might have been something else entirely. They circled her hiding spot, paused, moved on. She didn't relax until the sounds faded into the distance. Time crawled. The stone at her back grew cold, leaching what little warmth her body had left. She shivered, teeth chattering, but didn't dare move to seek better shelter. Here at least she knew what threatened her. Out there, anything could be waiting. The moon finally rose, casting silver light across the desert. It transformed the landscape into something otherworldly, all sharp shadows and gleaming stone, beautiful and terrible at once. Lena watched it through heavy-lidded eyes, fighting the urge to sleep. Sleep meant vulnerability. Sleep might mean never waking up. But exhaustion was a stronger force than fear. And eventually her eyes closed despite her efforts. Her last coherent thought was a prayer not for rescue. She was past believing in such things, but simply for the strength to face whatever morning would bring. If morning came at all. The sound of hoofbeats pulled Lena from a fitful doze. At first, she thought she was dreaming her mind, conjuring rescue where none existed. But the steady rhythm grew louder, accompanied by the creak of leather and the soft snorting of a horse. Real sounds. Real danger. She pressed herself deeper into the rock crevice, hardly daring to breathe. The rider was taking his time, letting the horse pick its way carefully along the rocky trail. That meant he knew the terrain, was comfortable here even in the pre-dawn darkness. A local, then, whether that boded well or ill. She couldn't say. The hoofbeats stopped perhaps 20 feet from her hiding place. Leather creaked as the rider shifted in his saddle. Then came the scratch of a match, and a small flame bloomed in the darkness. The brief light illuminated a man's face, weathered, bearded, eyes shadowed beneath a worn hat. He lit a cigarette, shook out the match, and sat there smoking in silence. Wade Coulter had been riding since midnight, unable to sleep after finding one of his cattle torn apart by wolves. It wasn't the loss of the animal that bothered him that was part of ranching in this hard country. It was the wastefulness of it. The wolves had taken what they needed and left the rest for the buzzards. Death serving death. The way of things out here. He'd needed to move, to put distance between himself and the carcass, so he'd saddled his mare and set out with no particular destination in mind. The trail toward Copper Creek was familiar enough to ride in darkness, and sometimes a man needed to be in motion to think clearly. The cigarette glowed orange as he inhaled. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he might have imagined it. A shuddering breath, quickly stifled. Human. Close. Wade's hand moved to the Colt at his hip but didn't draw. He'd learned long ago that fear made people dangerous, and whoever was hiding in these rocks was already afraid. "I know you're there," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Not looking for trouble, just passing through." Silence, then another of those catching breaths, like someone trying not to cry. "You hurt?" he asked. A longer silence, then, barely audible, "Go away." A woman. Wade felt something tighten in his chest. A woman alone out here meant trouble of one kind or another. None of it good. "Can't do that," he said, still not moving from his saddle. "Not until I know you're all right." "I'm fine." The voice was stronger now, edged with something between defiance and desperation. "Just, please, keep riding." Wade dropped the cigarette, grinding it out with his boot heel. He swung down from the mare, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Ma'am, the next water is 15 miles on. You got supplies. A horse." Movement in the shadows. She was backing away, deeper into the rocks. "Don't come any closer." He stopped. In the growing light of dawn, he could just make out her shape, huddled, defensive, clutching what looked like a stick. "All right, I'll stay right here, but you sound like you need help." "I don't need anything from you." "The hell you don't." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. He gentled his tone. "Listen, I've got water, food. You can have both without strings attached. I'll leave them right here and ride on if that's what you want." She emerged slightly from the shadows, just enough for him to see the state of her. Dress torn and filthy, hair a matted tangle, face gaunt with thirst and exhaustion. She looked like she'd been through hell and was still traveling. "I'm filthy," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "Don't touch me." The raw shame in her voice hit Wade like a physical blow. He'd heard that tone before, from people who'd been beaten down so hard they'd started believing they deserved it. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I've been riding since midnight. Haven't washed in 3 days. My horse probably smells better than I do right now." He tried for a smile, though she probably couldn't see it in the dim light. "So, if we're talking about filthy, I've got you beat." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You don't understand. She stopped, shook her head. "Just leave me alone." Wade studied her for a long moment. Pride was about all she had left. He could see that. Take that away and she might shatter entirely. "Tell you what," he said. "I'm going to water my horse. There's a stream about a 1/4 mile back. While I'm gone, there'll be a canteen and some jerky sitting right here on this rock. What happens to them is none of my business." He turned back to his mare, making a show of checking the saddle, giving the woman time to think. When he glanced back, she'd emerged a bit more from her hiding place. The dawn light wasn't kind to her, revealing the full extent of her condition. Her lips were cracked, eyes sunken. She wouldn't last another day out here. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why what?" "Why help me? You don't know me. I could be—" She trailed off. "Could be what, a thief, a murderer?" Wade shrugged. "Maybe you are, but right now you're just someone who needs water. Rest we can sort out later." "There is no later. There's no we." Fresh panic edged into her voice. "I didn't ask for your help." "No, you didn't." Wade untied the canteen from his saddle, set it on a flat rock between them. The jerky followed, wrapped in cloth. "But here it is anyway. You can take it or leave it. Like I said, none of my business." He gathered the mare's reins, started to lead her away. He'd gone perhaps 10 steps when the woman spoke again. "Wait." He paused, but didn't turn around. If I take these things, what do you want in return?" Now he did turn. She was standing fully in the open, that pathetic stick still clutched in one hand, chin raised despite everything. Brave, he thought. Broken, but brave. "I want you to live through this day," he said simply. "That's all." Her face crumpled. She sank to her knees, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sobs. Wade stood there, uncertain. Every instinct said to go to her, to offer comfort, but she'd made her boundaries clear. "You're not what's on you," he said quietly. "You're what's in you." She looked up at him through her tears, and he saw the moment his words registered. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, maybe, or the first faint stirring of hope. "I can't," she gestured helplessly at herself. "Look at me." "I am looking," Wade kept his voice matter-of-fact. "I see someone who's been walking all night. Someone who's thirsty and tired and scared. Nothing shameful in any of that." She reached for the canteen with shaking hands, unscrewed the cap, took a small sip, then another. Wade could see her fighting the urge to gulp it all down at once. "Slowly," he advised. "You'll make yourself sick otherwise." She nodded, took another careful sip. "Thank you," she whispered. "Name's Wade Coulter. Got a ranch about 10 miles north of here." She hesitated. Lena McCall." "Well, Miss McCall, you're welcome to the water and food. There's also a town about 5 miles east if you're looking for work." "No." The word came out sharp, frightened. "No towns. I can't." She stopped, shook her head. Wade filed that away. "Running from something, then, or someone. All right, no towns. But you can't stay here either. This is wolf country, and they get bold when they're hungry." She laughed bitterly. "Wolves? Of course there are wolves." "My ranch isn't much," Wade continued. "But there's a barn. You could rest there for a day or two. Get your strength back. No questions asked." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for payment." "Men always want payment." The words were flat, exhausted. "One way or another." Wade felt anger rise in his throat. Not at her, but at whoever had taught her that lesson. He swallowed it down. Some men, maybe, not all. She studied him for a long moment. This dusty cowboy with his patient eyes and careful distance. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," he said honestly. "Trust is earned, not given, but you don't have to trust me to know you need help. And I'm the only help on offer right now." The sun was fully up now, already warming the air. Soon it would be too hot to travel comfortably. Lena took another sip of water, then carefully capped the canteen. "Just the barn?" she asked. "Just the barn. You'll have it to yourself. I'll bring food and water. Leave them outside if you prefer." "And then?" "Then you decide what comes next. Stay, go. Whatever you need to do, I won't stop you either way." She stood slowly, wincing. Wade noticed the limp, the way she favored her left ankle. Walking 10 miles would be agony for her, but he didn't offer to let her ride. Not yet. She needed to feel she had choices, even if they were limited ones. "All right," she said finally, "but I walk on my own." "Fair enough." Wade turned to his mare, started walking. After a moment, he heard Lena following, her uneven footsteps crunching on the rocky soil. They traveled in silence for the first mile, Wade leading the horse, Lena maintaining a careful distance behind. The sun climbed higher, and Wade could hear her breathing growing labored. He slowed his pace without making it obvious. "Need to rest the horse," he said eventually, though the mare was barely winded. "Mind if we stop for a bit?" Lena sank onto a boulder with poorly concealed relief. Wade pretended to check the mare's hooves while she caught her breath. "I wasn't always like this," she said suddenly. Wade glanced at her. Never thought you were. I had work, respectable work. I was... She trailed off, shook her head. Doesn't matter what I was. Sure it does. Just because you're having a hard time doesn't mean you're not still whoever you were before. She looked at him with those wounded eyes, and he saw she wanted to believe him but couldn't quite manage it. Not yet. We should keep moving, she said. Wade nodded, and they resumed their slow journey. By the time his ranch came into view, a modest cabin, a barn, a few corrals, Lena was swaying on her feet. But she'd made it under her own power, and Wade could see that meant something to her. Barn's there, he said, pointing. I'll bring some blankets, more food and water. There's a pump around back if you want to wash up. She stood there looking at the barn like it was a palace or a prison, he couldn't tell which. Miss McCall. She startled, seemed to come back to herself. Thank you, she said formally, for your kindness. Nothing kind about it, Wade said, just being neighborly. But as he watched her limp toward the barn, back straight despite everything, Wade knew it was more than that. Something about this woman called to him not her beauty, though he suspected it was there beneath the dirt and exhaustion. It was her courage, the way she kept fighting even when she had nothing left to fight with. He'd known that feeling once, and someone had helped him too. The barn smelled of hay and horses, familiar scents that made Lena's chest tight with memory. Her father's barn had smelled like this, back when the world made sense and she knew her place in it. She pushed the thought away. That life was gone, buried with her parents in a Missouri cemetery. Wade had been true to his word. He'd brought blankets, clean ones that smelled of lye soap, and left them just inside the barn door, along with more food and a fresh pail of water. She'd heard his footsteps retreat, heard him moving around outside, but he hadn't tried to come in. Lena spread one blanket over the hay in an empty stall and sat down gingerly. Every muscle ached. Her feet were raw, and her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat. But she was alive. And for now, safe. It was more than she'd dared hope for when the sun set yesterday. The jerky was tough but good, seasoned with salt and pepper. She ate slowly, her stomach cramping around the first real food she'd had in over a day. The barn was warm but not stifling, with gaps between the boards that let in air and strips of sunlight. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, and somewhere above her, pigeons cooed softly. She should sleep. Her body demanded it. But first, Lena looked at the water pail, then at her filthy hands. The dirt was ground in deep, under her nails, in every crease and line. She dipped her hands in the water, scrubbed at them with just her palms. The water turned brown immediately. A soft knock on the barn wall made her freeze. Miss McCall, Wade's voice, carefully distant. I'm heating water for washing. Got an old tub I can set up behind that canvas screen in the corner. You'd have privacy. A bath. The longing for it was so intense it made her dizzy, but... I couldn't, she said. Sure you could. Water's already heating. Shame to waste it. She heard his footsteps moving away again. Not waiting for more argument, Lena sat there, torn between desperate want and paralyzing shame. She smelled of sweat and trail dust and fear. The idea of being clean again, truly clean. It took Wade 3 trips to fill the tub, an old wooden thing that had seen better days but didn't leak. Each time he came in, he kept his eyes averted, focusing on his task. He'd rigged up a canvas screen that sectioned off one corner of the barn, creating a private space. Soap's there on the stool, he said on his last trip. And I brought well. My sister left some clothes here last time she visited. They're not fancy, but they're clean. Might be a bit big on you. His sister, of course. No wife would leave her husband's barn set up for bathing another woman. Mr. Coulter. Wade, he corrected. And before you say you can't accept, consider this, I've got to live with myself. Man who lets someone suffer when he could help isn't much of a man. So you'd be doing me a kindness. Really? Despite everything, Lena felt her lips twitch. That's an interesting way to look at it. My mother always said I had a talent for seeing things sideways. He headed for the door. I'll be working on the fence in the north pasture. Won't be back for a couple hours at least. She waited until she heard his horse leaving before moving to the screened area. The tub steamed gently, and beside it sat not only soap but a washcloth, and her throat closed a comb. When had she last combed her hair properly days ago? In another lifetime? Lena undressed with shaking hands, trying not to look at her body. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, but she could still feel them, phantom pains that might never leave. She stepped into the water, gasping at the heat of it. For a moment she just stood there, letting the warmth seep into her bones. Then, slowly, she lowered herself down. The water embraced her like forgiveness. She sank down until only her face remained above the surface, feeling the heat work at muscles she'd forgotten were knotted. Tears came then, silent and unstoppable, mixing with the bathwater. She cried for the girl who'd left Missouri with such hope, for the woman who'd endured 3 months of accusations and subtle cruelties, for the person she'd become suspicious, frightened, ready to run at shadows. When the tears finally stopped, she sat up and reached for the soap. It was plain lye soap, nothing fancy, but it smelled clean and honest. She lathered her hands, then her arms, watching the dirt sluice away. Her hair was the worst, matted and tangled beyond belief. She worked at it patiently, using her fingers first, then carefully with the comb, trying not to pull too hard. Clumps of hair came free, but she didn't care. What remained would be clean. The water was gray-brown by the time she finished. Lena stood, shivering in the sudden coolness, and reached for the towel Wade had left. It was rough but clean, and she dried herself quickly before turning to the clothes. A simple blue cotton dress, worn but well mended. A chemise and drawers that were indeed too big but could be managed. Stockings that had been darned multiple times. Everything spoke of a practical woman who took care of what she had. Wade's sister, whoever she was, would probably be horrified to know a stranger was wearing her things. Lena dressed quickly, then faced the dilemma of her old clothes. They were beyond saving. Really torn, stained, carrying too many bad memories. She bundled them up, set them aside. Maybe they could be burned. The thought satisfied her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Clean clothes, clean skin, clean hair braided and pinned up properly. She felt almost human again. No, that wasn't right. She felt like a ghost pretending to be human, wearing someone else's life. The barn door creaked, and she tensed. But it was only a barn cat, orange and battle-scarred, coming to investigate the newcomer. It sat a few feet away, studying her with yellow eyes. "Hello," Lena said softly. The cat meowed once, then settled into a loaf shape, apparently deciding she was acceptable. Strange how that small acceptance loosened something in her chest. Time passed. The sun tracked across the sky, marked by the moving strips of light through the barn walls. Lena dozed fitfully, starting awake at every sound. Once she heard Wade's voice, distant, talking to his horse or cattle. The normalcy of it was both comforting and painful. Near sunset, she heard his horse returning. His footsteps approached the barn, stopped outside. "Miss McCall, I'm leaving supper outside the door." She waited until he'd gone before retrieving it. A plate covered with a clean cloth beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but hot and plentiful. A cup of coffee, still steaming. He'd even included a spoon and napkin. Lena ate at the doorway of the barn, watching the sky turn colors. The ranch wasn't much to look at. A few outbuildings, corrals that needed repair, a vegetable garden that had seen better days. But it was peaceful and real, and nobody here had accused her of being a thief. As full dark approached, she saw a light in the cabin window. Then Wade emerged, carrying something. He set it on the porch, and she heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being loaded. He was planning to sleep outside, to guard the barn, to guard her while still respecting the distance she needed. The realization made her throat tight again. "Mr. Coulter Wade," she called softly. His shadow stilled. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't need to sleep outside. I'm safe here." "I know you are. This is more about the wolves. They've been bold lately. Lost a calf last week." A lie. Kindly meant. Lena recognized it as the same sort of sideways thinking he'd used earlier, allowing her to accept protection without feeling indebted. "Thank you," she said. "Get some rest. Miss McCall. Tomorrow's another day." She retreated into the barn, wrapped herself in the blankets. The orange cat appeared from somewhere and curled up near her feet, purring like distant thunder. Outside, she could hear Wade settling himself on the porch, the creak of boards as he found a comfortable position. She should have been terrified, sleeping in a strange place with a man she'd just met standing guard outside. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Lena felt something that might have been safety. It was fragile, temporary, probably an illusion, but for tonight, it was enough. The moon rose, sending silver light through the gaps in the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, but they seemed far away now, held at bay by walls and warmth and the presence of a man who asked for nothing but to help. Lena's eyes grew heavy. Her last thought before sleep took her was of the comb, sitting neat and clean beside the now empty tub. Such a simple thing, but Wade had thought of it, had looked at her and seen not just the dirt and desperation, but a woman who might want to feel human again. "You're not what's on you." He'd said, "You're what's in you." Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe there was still something inside her worth saving, worth fighting for. The thought followed her down into dreams that, for once, weren't filled with running. Outside, Wade shifted his weight, checked the rifle's action, and settled in for a long night. He'd stood guard before, over cattle and horses and once over a friend with a bullet in his gut. But this felt different, more important somehow. Like he was guarding not just a person but a possibility, the chance for someone to heal, to start over, to find their way back to themselves. The stars wheeled overhead, and the night sounds of the desert continued their ancient chorus. But within the circle of the ranch buildings, within the small sphere of safety Wade had created, Lena McCall slept deeply for the first time in months, clean and warm and watched over. It was a small grace in a hard world, but sometimes, Wade thought as he kept his vigil, small graces were enough. Sometimes they were everything. 3 days passed before Lena spoke of Kansas City. 3 days of careful distance and quiet kindness, of meals left outside the barn door and water heated for washing. Wade never pushed, never asked questions. He went about his ranch work as if having a woman hiding in his barn was the most natural thing in the world. On the 4th morning, Lena emerged while he was mending a bridle on the porch. She stood in the barn doorway, arms wrapped around herself despite the warming sun. "I wasn't always like this," she said, echoing her words from that first day on the trail. Wade looked up from his work but didn't speak, sensing she needed to tell this in her own way. "My parents had a small farm outside Independence. Nothing grand, but it was ours." She moved closer, still maintaining distance but no longer fleeing his presence. "When they died of fever 2 winters ago, I sold the farm to pay their debts, took what little was left and went to Kansas City to find work." She sat on the porch steps, far enough away to feel safe. The orange barn cat followed her, winding around her ankles. "Mrs. Harriet Pemberton hired me as a housemaid. She seemed kind at first, sympathetic to my situation." Lena's voice turned bitter. "I should have known better." "Kind people don't need to tell you how kind they're being." Wade set aside the bridle, giving her his full attention now. "At first it was small things. The coffee was too weak, too strong. The floors weren't clean enough, were cleaned too often. Nothing I did pleased her, but I needed the work, so I endured it." The cat jumped into Lena's lap, and she stroked it absently. Then things started going missing. A hairpin, a ribbon, small things, misses. Pemberton would rage about her careless daughters, about the decline of morals in young people. But the way she'd look at me. "She was setting you up," Wade said quietly. Lena nodded. "I think so now, but then I just worked harder, tried to be above suspicion. I never went into her room without her present, never touched anything I wasn't specifically told to clean. It didn't matter." She was quiet for a long moment, fingers buried in the cat's fur. 3 months into my employment, her silver brush went missing. She accused me publicly, in front of her entire social circle, said she'd been foolish to trust someone of my background. "But you didn't take it."
"Of course not."
But my denial meant nothing. She had her husband search my room, and, surprise, there it was, hidden under my mattress, where I'd never seen it before that moment. Wade's hands clenched into fists. He'd known people like that, people who enjoyed having power over others, who created situations to justify their cruelty. "She gave me a choice," Lena continued. "Leave immediately with no reference, no pay, and her promise to spread word of my theft to every household in the city, or stay and work without wages to pay back what I'd stolen. That's not a choice. That's—" "I know what it is." Lena's voice was steady, but Wade could see the tension in her shoulders. "I stayed for another month. She worked me harder than before, found fault with everything, and then—" She stopped, one hand going unconsciously to her back. "You don't have to tell me," Wade said.
I need to."
She took a shaky breath.
"She had a riding crop. Said I'd been insolent, though I'd only asked for time to eat lunch. The first strike caught me by surprise. By the third, I was running."
Wade stood abruptly, needing to move before the anger in him exploded. He paced to the end of the porch, hands clenched behind his back.
"I hid in the city for 2 days, sleeping in alleys, stealing bread when I had to. I'm not proud of it."
Her voice was small now. "When I heard the Pembertons were traveling to Denver, I used the last of my money to buy a place as a servant with another family going the same way. Thought I could start over, but Mrs. Pemberton saw me at one of the stops. The next morning, she made her accusation about the hairpin, and they left me on the trail. With nothing." "With nothing," she agreed. "And now you know. I am a thief and a runaway, and—" "You're a survivor." Wade turned to face her. "You're someone who was wronged and refused to accept it. Nothing shameful in that." Lena looked up at him, tears tracking down her cheeks.
"She made me believe I was worthless,
That I deserved it somehow. Even now, I can hear her voice. Then we need to give you better voices to remember." Wade moved closer, still careful not to crowd her. "You asked me why I helped you. Truth is, someone did the same for me once. I was younger, angrier, making my living in ways I'm not proud of. An old rancher named Samuel Hodges took me in, gave me work, showed me a different way to be. He used to say that we don't owe our debts to the people who helped us, we pay them forward to the next person who needs it. Is that what I am, a debt to be paid? No." Wade met her eyes directly. "You're a person who needs time to remember who she is beyond someone else's cruelty. And I've got time to spare." Lena wiped her cheeks with her sleeve.
"I can work, I can cook, clean, tend garden."
"I'm sure you can, but that's not what you need right now. I won't be a charity case." Wade almost smiled. There was the pride again. Bent, but not broken. "Tell you what, you want to help out, I won't stop you. But you work when you choose, rest when you need. And the first time I see you pushing yourself out of some misplaced sense of debt, we renegotiate. Deal." She considered this.
"You're a strange man. Wade Coulter."
"Been told that before. It's not an insult."
I didn't take it as one.
They sat in companionable silence for a while. The sun climbed higher, warming the porch. Wade picked up his bridal work again, and Lena watched his hands move with practiced efficiency. You don't owe anyone your shame, Wade said suddenly. That's what Samuel told me, when I finally admitted what I'd done before he found me. The shame isn't yours to carry. It belongs to the people who wronged you. Easy to say. Hard to believe, I know. He tested the bridle's strength, satisfied with the repair. But saying it is the first step. Believing comes later. And if it never comes? Wade looked at her then. This woman who'd endured so much and was still fighting. Then you keep saying it until it does. And you let other people believe it for you until you can believe it yourself. Lena stroked the cat, which had fallen asleep in her lap. I don't even know who I am anymore. Lena McCall, daughter of respectable farmers, Lena the housemaid, Lena the accused thief. How about just Lena? Wade suggested. The rest is just things that happen to you, not who you are. Just Lena, she repeated softly. I don't know if I remember how to be her. No rush. She'll come back when she's ready. That afternoon, Lena helped with the cooking for the first time. Nothing fancy, just biscuits to go with the stew Wade had started. But she moved around the kitchen with growing confidence, and Wade noticed she hummed softly as she worked, some half-remembered tune from happier times. They ate together at the small table, conversation flowing easier now that some truths had been spoken. Lena asked about the ranch, and Wade told her about his struggles to make it profitable, about cattle prices and water rights, and the constant battle against weather and predators. It's not much, he said, suddenly aware of how modest his life must seem. But it's honest work. Honest is worth more than grand. Lena replied, I learned that in Kansas City. As the sun set, Wade walked her back to the barn. She'd taken to spending her days in the cabin, but still retreated to the barn at night. He understood. Trust came slowly, and she needed to know she could leave if she wanted. Thank you, she said at the barn door. For listening. For not, she gestured vaguely, for not looking at me differently now that you know. Nothing to thank me for. You're still the same person who walked 10 miles on a twisted ankle rather than give up. Knowing why doesn't change that. She smiled then, small but real. Good night, Wade. Good night, Lena. Just Lena. As he walked back to the cabin, Wade thought about scars, the ones you could see and the ones you couldn't. Lena carried both kinds, and it would take more than a few days of safety to heal them. But healing had to start somewhere, and maybe this ranch, for all its isolation and simplicity, could be that place. Inside the barn, Lena sat on her makeshift bed, the cat curled beside her. For the first time since leaving her parents' farm, she'd spoken her story aloud. The shame was still there, clinging like cobwebs, but it felt less suffocating now. Someone knew what had happened to her, and he hadn't turned away, hadn't blamed her or told her what she should have done differently. You don't owe anyone your shame, she whispered to the darkness, testing the words. They felt foreign on her tongue, but she would keep saying them until maybe, someday, she could believe them. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, and the desert night wrapped around the ranch like a blanket. It was a hard land, unforgiving in its own way. But sometimes, Lena thought as sleep began to claim her, the hard places were where you found the most unexpected kindness. The wooden comb appeared on the kitchen table 2 weeks after Lena's arrival. Wade had set it there without ceremony while she was feeding the chickens. Next to a small note written in his careful hand, if you ever want to brush out the past. Lena found it when she came in to start the noon meal. She stood frozen, staring at the simple object as if it were a snake that might strike. It wasn't new the teeth were worn smooth with use. The wood darkened with age, but it was clean and honest, like everything else Wade offered. She picked up the note, read it 3 times. Such simple words, but they cut straight through to something raw inside her. Her hand trembled as she set the paper down. The comb itself was heavier than she expected when she finally picked it up. Solid, real. She turned it over, noticed initials carved into the handle, M.C., not hers. Then, Someone else's treasure, given freely. It was my mother's, Wade said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. Margaret Coulter, she'd want it used, not sitting in a drawer gathering dust.
I can't.
You can. He moved to the stove, checking the coffee pot. She used to say a woman's hair was her glory. Spent an hour every night brushing hers. Even when we were traveling and had to camp rough, my father would tease her about it, but she never missed a night. Lena clutched the comb, feeling the smooth wood warm under her fingers.
What happened to her?
Pneumonia, winter of '81. Father followed her 6 months later. Said he couldn't find his way without her. Wade poured 2 cups of coffee, set one near Lena. I kept the comb. Don't know why. Maybe for this moment. She sank into a chair, still holding the comb like something precious. My hair it's not what it was. Hair grows back.
That's not what I mean.
I know what you mean. Wade sat across from her, his eyes steady and patient. But maybe it's time to stop seeing yourself through her eyes. Her Mrs. Pemberton, the woman who'd made Lena feel dirty, worthless, less than human, even now, miles and weeks away. Her voice echoed in Lena's mind.
Filthy girl.
No wonder you have no people. Who would want you?
She said my hair was like a horse's tail,
Lena whispered. Coarse and ugly. Said I should be grateful she let me work in her house at all. Wade's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. She lied. You haven't seen it properly. I've seen enough, and what I see is a woman who's been convinced that lies are truth. That's the real damage people like her do. Not the physical hurt, but the way they get inside your head. Lena set the comb on the table, ran her fingers over the carved initials.
Your mother must have been beautiful.
She was ordinary to look at, but she carried herself like a queen. Said beauty wasn't what you had, but how you held it. He smiled at the memory. Course, she also said I'd never amount to much if I didn't stop bringing home every stray dog in the county. So she wasn't right about everything. Despite herself, Lena felt her lips twitch. Did you stop bringing them home? No, just got better at hiding them in the barn first few days. He nodded toward the door. That orange Tom out there, he's the latest. Shows up a year ago. Half an ear missing, ribs showing. Now he acts like he owns the place. He does seem very self-assured. That's one way to put it. Wade stood, collected his hat from the peg. I've got fence to mend in the south pasture. Take your time with whatever you decide. After he left, Lena sat for a long while, just looking at the comb. Such a simple thing, such an impossible thing. She hadn't properly tended her hair since that last morning in the Pemberton house, when she'd pinned it up neatly, hoping that perfect appearance might shield her from criticism. It hadn't. Of course. Nothing ever did. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, warming her shoulders. Somewhere outside, Wade's hammer rang against fence posts, a steady rhythm that spoke of normal life, normal work, the kind of life she'd once taken for granted. Finally, almost without conscious decision, Lena stood and walked to her small room off the kitchen she'd moved from the barn the previous week, though she still kept the door open at night, needing to know she could leave. The tiny mirror Wade had hung there showed her what she'd been avoiding, hair that was clean now but tangled, neglected, pulled back in a graceless knot. She took the pins out slowly, let the mass of it fall around her shoulders. It was longer than she'd realized, reaching past her shoulder blades. The ends were ragged where she'd tried to cut out the worst of the mats that first week. But it was hers, and it was clean, and maybe that was enough to start with. The first stroke of the comb caught immediately. Lena winced, worked at the tangle gently, found another. Each knot felt like a memory of dirty water, of cruel words, of nights spent wondering what she'd done to deserve such treatment. But with each careful stroke, something loosened, not just in her hair, but in her chest. She found herself crying as she worked, silent tears that dripped onto her hands. But she didn't stop. Stroke by stroke, tangle by tangle, she reclaimed something that had been taken from her. Not beauty, she couldn't think that far yet, just ownership. This was her hair, her body, her choice to tend it or not. By the time Wade returned for supper, Lena had braided her hair neatly, pinned it up with more care than she'd shown in months. It wasn't elaborate or fancy, but it was deliberate, and that made all the difference. He noticed immediately, she could tell by the way his eyes lingered for just a moment. But all he said was, "Smells good in here. What's for supper?" "Rabbit stew and cornbread if it didn't burn." She turned back to the stove, suddenly self-conscious. "Sounds perfect." They ate in companionable quiet. Wade talked about the fence, about a hawk he'd seen hunting mice in the far field. Normal things, safe things. But Lena could feel the change between them, subtle as a shift in the wind. She'd accepted his gift, and in doing so had accepted something larger, the possibility that she might be worth such gifts. That night, after Wade had retired to his room, Lena sat by the dying fire and took her hair down again. The comb moved easier now through the clean strands. She found herself humming, some half-remembered tune her mother used to sing. The sound surprised her. She hadn't hummed or sung since leaving Missouri. The orange cat appeared from wherever he spent his days, winding around her ankles before jumping into her lap. He purred like distant thunder as she stroked his battle-scarred head. "He's got us both, hasn't he?" she murmured to the cat. "Collecting strays." But the word didn't sting like it might have even a week ago. There was no shame in being lost if someone thought you were worth finding. No shame in being broken if someone saw you as worth mending. She combed her hair until it shone in the firelight, then braided it loosely for sleep. Tomorrow she would pin it up again, would go about the business of living, of working, of slowly becoming herself again. But tonight, she sat with the cat purring in her lap and felt something she'd thought lost forever, a tiny spark of peace. The comb lay on the table beside her, its worn wood gleaming softly. M.C. Margaret Coulter, who'd brushed her hair every night even while camping rough, who'd held her head high and called beauty not what you had, but how you held it. "Thank you," Lena whispered to the memory of a woman she'd never met. "I'll try to hold it well." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside was warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. And for tonight, that was more than enough. It was everything. The next morning, Wade found a small bundle on the porch, Lena's old dress, the one she'd worn on the trail, folded neatly despite its tatters. No note, but he understood. Some things needed to be let go before new things could grow. He took the bundle to the burn pile behind the barn, added kindling, struck a match. The fabric caught quickly, sending smoke spiraling into the clear morning sky. As he watched it burn, he thought about transformations, about the courage it took to let go of who you'd been forced to become. When he returned to the house, Lena was making breakfast, her hair pinned up in a style he hadn't seen before, a little softer, a little more careful. She glanced at him as he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes. "Good morning," was all he said. But his smile told her the rest. "Yes, I took care of it. Yes, I understand. Yes, you're allowed to leave that behind." She smiled back, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. "Good morning. Coffee's ready." And it was a good morning, a new morning, the first of many to come. The first time Wade took Lena to town was 3 weeks after he'd found her on the trail. She needed things: proper shoes, fabric for clothing, female necessities he couldn't provide. He'd offered to go alone, but she'd lifted her chin in that way he was coming to recognize. "I can't hide forever," she'd said, though her hands shook as she pinned on her hat. Copper Creek wasn't much of a town. One main street, a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, maybe 300 souls on a busy day. But to Lena, sitting beside Wade on the wagon seat, it might as well have been Kansas City itself. "We'll make it quick," Wade said as they rolled past the first buildings. In and out. But quick wasn't possible in a town where any stranger was news and a woman with Wade Coulter was headline material. Heads turned as they passed. Curtains twitched. By the time Wade helped Lena down in front of Harper's General Store, a small crowd of gossips had gathered outside the milliner's shop next door. Steady, Wade murmured, his hand briefly touching her elbow. Inside Harper's, the blessed dimness offered some reprieve. The store smelled of coffee beans and leather and penny candy. Mr. Harper, a thin man with kind eyes, nodded to Wade. Coulter, been a while. Jim. Wade removed his hat. This is Miss McCall. She's helping out at the ranch. Needs some supplies. Harper's eyes flickered with curiosity, but he simply said, Welcome. Miss, let me know if you need help finding anything. Lena moved through the store like a ghost, touching fabric bolts with careful fingers, examining buttons and thread. Wade hung back, letting her find her footing. She was doing well until Mrs. Adelaide Morrison swept in with her daughter Constance. Adelaide Morrison considered herself the social arbiter of Copper Creek. Her husband owned the largest cattle operation in the area, and she never let anyone forget it. Her eyes fixed on Lena immediately, taking in the borrowed dress, the carefully pinned hair, the way she stood slightly apart from Wade. Why, Mr. Coulter, Adelaide's voice carried through the store. What a surprise. And who is this? Wade stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, this is Miss McCall. Miss McCall. Adelaide's smile was sharp as glass. How interesting. Are you visiting our little town? I work for Mr. Coulter, Lena said quietly. Work? Adelaide's eyebrows rose. In what capacity, exactly? The insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Lena's face flushed, but before she could speak, Wade moved closer to her side. Miss McCall keeps house and helps with the ranch work. She's a respectable woman who's had some hard luck. I'd appreciate folks treating her as such. Adelaide's mouth pursed. Of course, though one does wonder what kind of hard luck brings a young woman to such circumstances alone. The kind that's none of our business, Wade said flatly. The tension in the store could have been cut with a knife. Mr. Harper busied himself with something behind the counter. Constance Morrison stared openly at Lena, drinking in every detail for later gossip. Well, Adelaide sniffed. I suppose we all must be charitable, though a man like you could do better. Mr. Coulter, there are several respectable young ladies in town who... I don't look for better. Wade cut her off, his voice carrying clearly, I look for real. The words hung in the air. Lena glanced at him, something shifting in her expression. Adelaide's face went red, then white. Indeed. Well, good day to you both. She swept out, Constance trailing behind, leaving a wake of disapproval. The encounter cast a shadow over the rest of their visit. Lena made her purchases quickly sturdy shoes, fabric, thread, necessities. But everywhere they went, eyes followed. Whispers trailed behind them like dust from the wagon wheels. At the feed store, old Thomas Garrett muttered something about that kind of woman, just loud enough to be heard. At the blacksmith's, young Ben Fletcher stared so openly that Wade had to step between him and Lena. Even at the church, where Wade stopped to leave a donation for the Widow's Fund, Reverend Phillips's wife Martha looked at Lena with thinly veiled suspicion. By the time they loaded the wagon, Lena was pale and quiet. She climbed up to the seat without waiting for Wade's help, staring straight ahead as they rolled out of town. They were a mile out before she spoke. They think I'm your... She couldn't finish the sentence. I know what they think. Doesn't it bother you, your reputation? My reputation was that I was a hard man who'd die alone on that ranch. If they want to think different now, that's their business. But it's not fair to you. Wade glanced at her. What's not fair is folks judging what they don't understand. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. Lena, hold your head high.
Easy for you to say. You're not the one they were looking at like...
Her voice broke. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in the shade of some cottonwoods. He turned on the seat to face her fully. Listen to me. Those people in there, half of them have secrets that would curl your hair. Adelaide Morrison came west because her family lost everything in a bad investment, and she had to marry whoever would have her. Martha Phillips ran off with a traveling preacher when she was 16, only came back when he abandoned her. Ben Fletcher's mother wasn't married to his father, and everybody knows it. Lena looked at him in surprise. Point is, Wade continued, everybody's got a past. Difference is, some folks deal with it by pointing fingers at others. Makes them feel better about their own stories. But that's their failing, not yours. You really believe that? I know it. Same way I know that you're worth 10 of Adelaide Morrison on your worst day. They sat in silence for a moment. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves with a sound like whispered secrets.
Thank you,
Lena said finally.
for standing up for me, for the words you said.
Meant every one of them. She was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. When they started moving again, she sat a little straighter, chin lifted just a fraction higher. That evening, as Lena cooked supper, she seemed thoughtful. Wade watched her move around the kitchen more confident now. At home in the space, the orange cat wound around her ankles, hoping for scraps. "I've been thinking," she said as she set plates on the table,
"about what you said, about everybody having a past."
Wade waited. Maybe that's why it's so easy for them to believe the worst, because they know how quickly things can go wrong, how easily a person can fall. Maybe so. But you don't think that way. Wade considered his words carefully. I've been the person who fell, been the one folks whispered about. Difference is, someone decided I was worth more than my worst moment. Figure I can do the same for others. Lena sat down across from him.
"Will you tell me about before?"
So he did, over a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Wade told her about the angry young man he'd been after his parents died, about the drinking, the fighting, the months he'd spent drifting from town to town, looking for trouble and usually finding it, about the night he'd tried to rob Samuel Hodges and instead found himself offered a job and a chance to be better. He saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. Wade finished. Took years before I could see it too, but he was patient, said redemption wasn't a destination but a direction long as you're moving toward it. You're doing all right. Lena pushed beans around her plate. What if they're right? Though the people in town, what if I am just another hard luck story, another stray you've taken in? Then you're in good company. Wade gestured to the cat, who was now grooming himself with great dignity. Augustus there seems pretty content with the arrangement. Despite everything, Lena smiled. Augustus, that's his name. Seemed to fit. He's got opinions about everything and isn't shy about sharing them. As if in agreement, the cat meowed loudly. The smile lingered on Lena's face. I suppose there are worse things than being a stray who found a good home. That's not what you are, Wade said seriously. But even if it was, nothing wrong with it. We all need shelter sometimes. The lucky ones find it. That night, Lena brushed her hair with extra care, thinking about the faces in town, the whispers, the assumptions. They would talk, that was certain. By tomorrow, half the county would have heard about Wade Coulter's woman. The stories would grow in the telling, becoming more scandalous with each repetition. But sitting in the lamplight, listening to Wade's steady footsteps on the porch as he made his evening rounds, Lena found she minded less than she'd expected. Let them talk, let them whisper. She knew the truth of her own story, and so did the one person whose opinion mattered. Tomorrow she would go about her work with her head high, the way Wade had told her to. She would tend the chickens and work in the garden and cook meals for a man who saw her as more than her circumstances. And if the good people of Copper Creek wanted to make more of it than that, Well, that was their business. As Wade would say, she was real. That was what he'd said in the store, what he valued above better. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Lena began to believe that real might be enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by Jake Fleming's boy, who rode out from town once a week with mail for the outlying ranches. Wade was shoeing a horse when the boy appeared, dust-covered and eager to be on his way. "Mail for you, Mr. Coulter," the boy said, handing over an envelope. "Came on yesterday's stage." Wade frowned. He rarely received mail, had no family left to write. Few friends who knew their letters. The envelope was addressed in careful script to the Coulter Ranch, Copper Creek. No name, just the place. "Thanks, Tommy." Wade gave the boy a penny for his trouble and watched him ride off before examining the letter more closely. The paper was fine quality, the kind that spoke of money and position. His gut tightened with unease. Inside the house, Lena was kneading bread dough, flour dusting her arms up to the elbows. She'd taken to baking twice a week now, filling the house with warm, yeasty smells that made it feel more like a home than it had in years. "Let her come," she asked, not looking up from her work. Seems so. Wade broke the seal, unfolded the paper. As he read, his expression darkened. Lena's hand stilled. "Wade." He passed her the letter wordlessly. She wiped her hands on her apron before taking it, and he watched the color drain from her face as she read. Underscore to whom it may concern. Underscore. It has come to our attention that one Lena McCall, formerly employed by the household of Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton of Kansas City, may be residing in or near Copper Creek. Miss McCall is wanted for questioning regarding the theft of valuable jewelry, specifically a silver bracelet worth considerable sum. Underscore. As Miss McCall departed her employment without notice and under suspicious circumstances, we are duty-bound to investigate this matter fully. A reward of $50 is offered for information leading to her whereabouts. Underscore. Any person harboring Miss McCall should be aware that they may be considered complicit in her crimes. We urge all good citizens to cooperate with the law in this matter. Underscore sincerely. Underscore Marshal Robert Hayes. Underscore Kansas City, Missouri. Underscore. The letter trembled in Lena's hands. She did it. She actually did it. Had the law sent a letter? Based on what her word alone, Wade took the letter back, reading it again. There's no mention of proof, no formal charges. This is intimidation, nothing more. It doesn't matter. Lena sank into a chair, flour still clinging to her arms. If the marshal here gets this, if people in town hear about a reward, then we deal with it. She looked up at him with haunted eyes. Wade, you can't. This isn't your fight. I should leave. Tonight, You can finish that bread you started. His voice was firm. Nobody's running anywhere. But if they come here, then they'll find a woman who works for me. Nothing more. Let them prove otherwise. Sheriff Daniel Morrison, Adelaide's brother-in-law, which explained a great deal about the speed with which he appeared at the ranch that afternoon. Wade saw him coming from the north pasture, recognized the self-important set of his shoulders. By the time Morrison reached the house, Wade was waiting on the porch, rifle casually propped against the wall. Afternoon, Sheriff. Morrison dismounted, making a show of tying his horse to the rail. Wade, heard you might have a visitor I should know about. I have help around the place, if that's what you mean. A woman. From Kansas City. Miss McCall disclosed where she was from when I hired her. Didn't see any reason to make a secret of it. Morrison produced a folded paper from his vest. Got this from Marshal Hayes. Says she's wanted for theft. Says she's wanted for questioning, Wade corrected. Different thing entirely. Man who studied law might know that. Morrison's face reddened. He'd read law for 6 months before giving up and coming west, a fact he didn't like reminded of. Don't get clever with me. Coulter, The woman's accused of stealing from her employers. Accused by who were charges filed? Is there a warrant? Well, no, but then seems to me there's nothing official here. Just a letter full of hearsay. There's mention of a reward. For information, which you now have. She's here, working as my housekeeper. Nothing criminal about that. Morrison shifted his weight, clearly frustrated. I need to talk to her. She's busy. Wade. She's had a hard time of it. Dan, whatever story you've been told, I guarantee it's not the whole truth. The woman working in my kitchen isn't a thief. She's someone who got crosswise with the wrong people and had to leave because of it. That's her story. That's what I know from watching her these past weeks. She works hard, doesn't complain, doesn't take what isn't given. Not exactly the behavior of a criminal. Morrison looked toward the house, where Lena's shadow could be seen through the kitchen window. Still need to talk to her. It's my job. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then, wait here. He went inside, found Lena pressed against the wall beside the window, arms wrapped around herself. He wants to talk to you. I know. I heard. Her voice was steady, but he could see the fear in her eyes. If I refuse, it looks like guilt. If I talk to him, I'll be right beside you. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. And Lena, he waited until she met his eyes. Tell the truth. It's more powerful than any lie they can spin. They went out together. Lena had removed her apron, smoothed her hair. She stood straight despite the tremor in her hands. Morrison looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. You're Lena McCall. I am. Formerly employed by the Pemberton family in Kansas City. Yes. They say you stole from them. A silver bracelet. Lena lifted her chin. They say many things. That doesn't make them true. You deny taking it. I deny taking anything from that house except the wages I was owed, which I never received. Morrison pulled out a small notebook. Why did you leave their employment? Lena glanced at Wade, who nodded encouragement. Mrs. Pemberton struck me with a riding crop. 3 times. I ran rather than endure more. The sheriff's pencil paused. This clearly wasn't what he'd expected. She disciplined you. If that's what you want to call it, I call it assault. Did anyone witness this? No, Mrs. Pemberton was careful about that. Just as she was careful to make sure no one witnessed her placing that silver brush under my mattress. You're saying she fabricated the theft? I'm saying things went missing in that house regularly, and somehow they always turned up in the servants' quarters. Draw your own conclusions. Morrison scribbled notes, frowning. Why didn't you report this to the authorities in Kansas City? Lena laughed bitterly. A servant's word against one of the city's most prominent families, who would have believed me. So you ran. So I survived. The sheriff closed his notebook. I'll need to wire Marshal Hayes. Tell him you're here. What happens next is up to him and the Pembertons. Then tell him this too. Wade interjected. Tell him that Miss McCall has been nothing but honest and hard-working in her time here. Tell him she has a position and a safe place, and that I'll vouch for her character. And tell him that if he wants to pursue this further, he'd better have more than accusations and hearsay. Morrison looked between them, something calculating in his expression. You're taking a lot of responsibility for someone you've known just a few weeks. Coulter. I take responsibility for what happens on my land. Miss McCall is under my protection as long as she chooses to stay. Your protection. Morrison's tone was suggestive. That's an interesting way to put it. Wade stepped forward, and Morrison instinctively backed up. Careful, Dan, your badge doesn't give you license to insult women, especially not on my property. The sheriff held up his hands. No insult intended, just observing that this is an unusual arrangement. Nothing unusual about hiring help when you need it. If you say so. Morrison untied his horse, swung into the saddle. I'll send that wire today. In the meantime, Miss McCall, I'd advise you not to leave the area."
"Where would I go?" Lena asked quietly. "This is my home now."
Something in the simple declaration seemed to catch Morrison off guard. He tipped his hat awkwardly and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and uncertainty in his wake. As soon as he was out of sight, Lena's composure crumbled. She sank onto the porch steps, head in her hands.
"They won't stop. The Pembertons. They'll push this until—"
"Until what until? They have to prove their accusations in court. Until they have to explain why they never filed charges in Kansas City." Wade sat beside her, careful to leave space between them.
"This is harassment. Lena, nothing more."
"You don't know them, their money, their connections. They don't get to decide your truth." Wade's voice was fierce. "Not anymore." She looked at him through her fingers.
"You said that before, when you wanted to take me to Kansas City to clear this up."
"Offer stands. You do that, travel all that way, get involved in this mess. I'm already involved." He gestured to the house, the ranch, the life they'd built in these few weeks. "Question is, what do you want to do, run and keep running, or face them down and end this once and for all?" Lena was quiet for a long time. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, somewhere in the barn. Augustus the cat yowled for his supper. "I'm tired of running," she said finally, "but I'm terrified of facing her again." "I know, but you won't be alone."
"Why?"
The question burst out of her.
"Why do you care so much? Why take such risks for someone who's brought nothing but trouble to your door?"
Wade considered his answer carefully.
"You remember I told you about Samuel Hodges, the man who helped me?"
She nodded. "I asked him the same thing once, why he bothered with a no-account drifter who'd tried to rob him. Know what he said?" "What?" "He said, because I can see who you're trying to become, and that person is worth the trouble." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks.
"I don't know who I'm trying to become. Someone who can hold her head high in any company.
Someone who knows her own worth.
Someone who's not afraid."
He pulled out his handkerchief, offered it to her. "I can see her already. Maybe it's time you started looking too." She took the handkerchief, wiped her eyes.
"Kansas City is a long way.
3 days by stage, 4 if we take the wagon." "When would we go?" "Soon as you're ready. Tomorrow. If you want. Next week. Next month. Your choice." Lena stood, smoothed her skirts.
"I need to think."
"Take all the time you need." She went inside, and soon Wade heard the sounds of supper preparation. Normal sounds, domestic sounds. But underneath them, he knew. A woman was gathering courage for a battle she'd never thought she'd have to fight. Later that night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Lena spoke into the comfortable silence.
"Next week,"
she said. "We'll go next week." Wade nodded. "I'll make arrangements." "And Wade, thank you for believing me, for standing up to the sheriff, for everything." "Nothing to thank me for, just doing what's right." But they both knew it was more than that. In a world where might too often made right, where money could buy truth and position could silence justice, choosing to stand with someone like Lena was no small thing. The letter from Kansas City sat on the mantel, its accusations seeming smaller in the firelight. Tomorrow there would be plans to make, preparations for a journey neither wanted but both knew was necessary. But tonight, there was peace in the small circle of light, and the promise that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The stage to Kansas City left Copper Creek at dawn on a Thursday. Wade had arranged for his neighbor, Tom Bradley, to look after the ranch. Lena wore her best dress, the blue one that had belonged to Wade's sister, and carried herself with careful dignity despite the whispers that followed them through town.
"Let them look,"
Wade murmured as he helped her into the coach. "By the time we come back, you'll have nothing to hide from." The journey took 4 days of bone-jarring travel. They stopped at way stations to change horses, eating simple meals of stew and cornbread, sleeping in separate rooms when rooms were available, or Lena in the coach and Wade standing guard when they weren't. He never complained, never suggested the impropriety of their traveling together, simply ensured her safety and comfort as best he could. On the fourth morning, Kansas City appeared on the horizon, smokestacks and church spires rising from the Missouri River Valley. Lena pressed her face to the coach window, and Wade saw her hands clench in her lap. "We can still turn back," he offered. "No," her voice was steady. "I've come this far." They took rooms at a respectable boarding house near the courthouse. Wade had wired ahead to Benjamin Hartwell, a lawyer Samuel Hodges had recommended years ago. The man was waiting for them in the parlor, a neat figure with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. "Mr. Coulter, Miss McCall." Hartwell shook their hands briskly. "I've made some inquiries since receiving your telegram. The situation is interesting." "How so?" Wade asked. "The Pembertons never filed formal charges. No police report, no official complaint. Just letters to various law enforcement agencies suggesting Miss McCall should be questioned." Hartwell adjusted his spectacles. "It's highly irregular, almost as if they wanted the appearance of pursuit without the scrutiny of actual legal proceedings." Lena leaned forward. "Can they do that, just accuse without proof?" "They can write letters, but without formal charges. It's merely harassment. The question is why they've taken this approach." "Because they know they have no real case," Wade said. "Perhaps, or perhaps there's more to this story." Hartwell pulled out a notebook. "Miss McCall, I need you to tell me everything about your time with the Pembertons. Every detail might matter." For the next hour, Lena recounted her months of service. The lawyer took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When she described the planted silver brush, he looked particularly interested. Were there other servants who might have witnessed these incidents? Lena thought carefully. "There was a girl named Mary O'Brien. She worked in the kitchen, and Thomas, the driver. They both saw how Mrs. Pemberton treated me, though I don't know if they'd speak against her." "Let me worry about that." Hartwell closed his notebook. "I suggest we pay a visit to the Pemberton household tomorrow. Catch them off guard, as it were." "Is that wise?" Lena asked, fear creeping into her voice. "My dear, in my experience, people who make false accusations rarely expect to be confronted directly. They count on their victims being too frightened or too poor to fight back." He smiled thinly. "Lucky for you. You have Mr. Coulter here, who seems neither frightened nor poor." That evening, Wade found Lena in the boarding house garden, sitting on a bench among the late roses. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. "Scared?" he asked, settling beside her. "Terrified." She managed a weak smile. "I keep thinking I'll see her on the street, that she'll appear around every corner." "She's just a woman. Lena, a cruel one, maybe, but flesh and blood like the rest of us. You didn't know her, the way she could make you feel so small, so worthless, like you were nothing." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Want to know what I see when I look at you?" She glanced at him, uncertain. "I see someone who walked alone through the desert rather than give up, who survived things that would break most people, who gets up every morning and chooses to keep going, even when it's hard." He met her eyes steadily. "That's not nothing. That's everything." The next morning dawned gray and humid. Lena dressed carefully, pinning her hair in the style she'd worn as a servant, neat, respectable, invisible. Wade noticed but didn't comment. The Pemberton house sat on Quality Hill, 3 stories of red brick and white columns that spoke of new money trying to look like old. As their hired carriage pulled up, Lena's breathing quickened. "Remember," Hartwell said, "you have every right to be here. You're not the accused anymore, you're the accuser." A maid answered the door, not Mary O'Brien, but a new girl who looked barely 16. Her eyes widened at the sight of visitors. "We're here to see Mrs. Pemberton," Hartwell announced, handing over his card. "On a legal matter." The girl scurried away. They waited in the foyer, Lena standing rigidly between Wade and the lawyer. Wade could feel the tension radiating from her. See the way her hands trembled despite her clasped fingers. "My dear Mr. Hartwell, what an unexpected pleasure." Harriet Pemberton descended the stairs like a queen granting an audience. She was exactly as Lena had described, handsome in a cold way, with pale eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes fixed on Lena with surprise that quickly shifted to disdain. "And you've brought guests?" "My client, Miss Lena McCall, and her employer, Mr. Wade Coulter." Hartwell's voice was professionally pleasant. "We're here about the accusations you've been spreading." "Accusations, Mrs." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "I've merely reported a theft to the appropriate authorities." "Without filing charges, without proof, that's not reporting. Madam, that's slander." A door opened down the hall, and Mr. Pemberton appeared, a thin, nervous man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else.
"Harriet, what's this about?"
"Nothing to concern yourself with, Herbert." His wife's voice was sharp. "Just dealing with a former servant who seems to have forgotten her place." "My place," Lena said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself, "was to work honestly for honest wages, which I did until you decided to make me your scapegoat." "Mrs." Pemberton's face flushed. "How dare you come into my home?" "The way you came into my room." Lena stepped forward, and Wade saw something change in her posture. "The way you planted that brush under my mattress. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out, that I was too stupid to see the pattern?" "You're delusional." "Am I? Then where's the missing bracelet if I stole it? Where is it?" "You obviously sold it." "Where to whom do you have any evidence at all? Or just your word against mine?" "Mrs." Pemberton's mouth opened and closed. Her husband shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps," Hartwell interjected smoothly, "we should discuss this matter more privately. Unless you'd prefer I file a formal complaint with the courts about harassment and defamation of character." "You wouldn't dare, Mrs." Pemberton hissed. "Try me." The lawyer's smile was sharp. "I have witnesses ready to testify about your treatment of servants. Mary O'Brien was quite forthcoming when I spoke with her yesterday." "That hit home, Mrs.?" Pemberton's face went white. "Mary wouldn't." "Mary is working for a family who treats her with respect. She has no reason to protect you anymore." Hartwell pulled out a document. "This is a signed statement detailing the numerous times items went missing, only to be found in servants' quarters, including the silver brush incident with Miss McCall." The silence stretched taut. "Mr." Pemberton cleared his throat. "Harriet, perhaps we should—" "Be quiet, Herbert." But the command lacked force. "Mrs." Pemberton was calculating. Wade could see it in her eyes. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "A written statement absolving Miss McCall of all accusations. A letter to every law enforcement agency you contacted, retracting your claims, and compensation for the wages you withheld and the damage to her reputation." "Compensation, Mrs." Pemberton's voice rose. "For that little—" "Careful." Wade spoke for the first time, his voice low and dangerous. "Whatever you were about to call her, I'd think twice." "Mrs." Pemberton looked at him, really looked, and something in Wade's expression made her step back. "This is extortion," she said weakly. "This is justice," Hartwell corrected. "The alternative is a very public trial where all your household secrets come to light. I'm sure Kansas City society would be fascinated to hear how you really run your home." The threat hung in the air. Wade watched Mrs. Pemberton's face cycle through emotions: rage, fear, calculation. Beside him, Lena stood perfectly still, but he could feel the effort it took. "Herbert." "Mrs." Pemberton said finally, not looking at her husband. "Get the checkbook." An hour later, they emerged into the humid Kansas City morning. Lena carried an envelope containing a bank draft for 6 months' wages and a letter completely exonerating her. Her hands shook as she held it.
"It's over,"
she said, wonder in her voice. "It's over," Hartwell confirmed. "That letter will be filed with the court and copies sent to every relevant authority. Your name is clear." They shook hands with the lawyer, who promised to handle the remaining paperwork. As his carriage drove away, Lena turned to Wade.
"I couldn't have done it without you."
"Sure you could have. Just might have taken longer." She laughed a real laugh, free of the weight she'd carried for so long.
"Can we go home now?"
"Home." The words settled between them, warm and solid. Wade smiled. "First, I think we should have a proper meal. Something better than stage-stop stew." They found a respectable restaurant near the boarding house. Over roast beef and potatoes. Lena told him about facing Mrs. Pemberton.
"When I saw her coming down those stairs, I almost ran. But then I remembered what you said, she's just flesh and blood. And suddenly she looked
smaller, older, just a bitter woman who needs to hurt others to feel important. Takes courage to see people clearly, especially people who've hurt you."
"I feel different."
Lena touched the envelope in her pocket. "Not just because of this, because I faced her, because I didn't run." That evening, as they prepared for the journey home, Lena knocked on Wade's door. He opened it to find her holding the bank draft. "This is more money than I've ever had," she said, "enough to go anywhere, start over properly." Wade's chest tightened. "That's true."
"I could go to San Francisco or Denver, somewhere nobody knows me."
"You could." She looked up at him, and he saw his own hope reflected in her eyes. "Or I could use it to buy a stake in a small ranch that needs help. Become a partner instead of just hired help." The words hung between them, an offer and a question all at once. "That ranch would be lucky to have you," Wade said carefully. "As a partner or anything else you might want to be." Lena smiled, the expression transforming her face.
"I'll take partner for now. The rest, we'll see what grows."
As she walked away, Wade stood in his doorway for a long moment. Tomorrow they'd begin the journey back to Copper Creek, back to the ranch that would now be theirs. Not just his, back to a life that suddenly held more possibilities than he'd dared imagine. In her room, Lena carefully folded the letter of exoneration and tucked it into her bag. She wouldn't need to look at it often. The real vindication had come in facing Harriet Pemberton without flinching, but she'd keep it anyway. A reminder that truth, spoken bravely, could overcome even the most powerful lies. The moon rose over Kansas City, silver and serene. Tomorrow would bring the journey home, but tonight, for the first time in over a year, Lena McCall fell asleep truly free. The journey back to Copper Creek passed in a blur of dusty roads and swaying coaches. Where the trip to Kansas City had been heavy with dread, the return felt like emerging from a long tunnel into sunlight. Lena dozed against the window, the lines of worry that had etched themselves around her eyes finally beginning to soften. They reached the ranch on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun was painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Tom Bradley had kept things running smoothly, and he greeted them with obvious relief. "About time you got back," he said, pumping Wade's hand. "That orange cat of yours has been giving me nothing but grief." As if summoned, Augustus appeared from the barn, tail held high, and proceeded to wind around Lena's skirts with an air of feline reproach.
"I missed you too,"
she murmured, bending to scratch behind his ears. Tom's eyes flickered between Wade and Lena with poorly concealed curiosity, but he asked no questions. After he left, they stood in the yard, reacquainting themselves with the familiar sights and sounds of home.
"Feels different,"
Lena said softly. "How so?"
"Before, I was just passing through, hiding. Now—"
She turned in a slow circle, taking in the cabin, the barn, the corrals.
"Now it feels like somewhere I belong."
They settled back into routine, but with subtle changes. Lena moved with new confidence, no longer glancing over her shoulder or startling at unexpected sounds. She claimed the vegetable garden as her particular project, coaxing life from the desert soil with patient determination. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and discussed improvements to the ranch, her suggestions now carrying the weight of an investor, not just an employee. It was 3 weeks after their return that Wade found her sitting by the kitchen table one evening, the wooden comb in her hands. She wasn't using it, just holding it, running her fingers over the worn initials. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, pouring himself coffee. "I was thinking about your mother, about what she said, beauty being not what you have, but how you hold it. She was a wise woman. I think I understand it now." Lena set the comb down carefully. "For so long, I let others tell me what I was worth, let their eyes be my mirror. But beauty, real beauty, it's in choosing to stand tall even when you feel small. It's in kindness when the world's been cruel. It's in—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "It's in what?" Wade prompted gently. "It's in the way you look at me," she finished quietly. "Like I'm someone worth looking at." The words hung in the air between them, delicate as spun glass. Wade set down his coffee cup, moved around the table to where she sat. "Lena." She looked up at him, and he saw everything in her eyes: hope, fear, longing, uncertainty. "You've been worth looking at since the day I found you fighting to survive on that trail," he said. "Not because of how you looked, but because of who you were, who you are." Her breath caught. "Wade, He held up a hand. "Let me finish. I told myself I was helping you the way Samuel helped me, paying forward a debt, but that was only part of it. The truth is, you brought something back to life in this place. In me, this ranch was just somewhere I existed before you came. Now it's a home." Tears tracked down Lena's cheeks, but she was smiling. "You saved my life." "Maybe, but you saved mine right back." They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, count the freckles the desert sun had brought out across her nose. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Wade," she whispered. "I know we said we'd see what grows," he said, "but I need you to know whatever you decide, however you want this to be, you have a place here. Always." "What if I want more than a place?" The question was barely audible. "What if I want a life, a real life, with—" She stopped, unable to voice the rest. But Wade understood. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Then I'd say you're not the only one wanting that." The kiss was gentle, tentative. Two people who'd been hurt learning to trust in something good. When they parted, Lena's eyes were shining. "I should probably court you proper," Wade said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Take you on buggy rides, bring you flowers." "Wade Coulter, if you think I need buggy rides after everything we've been through, what do you need then?" She considered this, her hand coming up to cover his where it still rested against her cheek. "Time, honesty, and maybe—" A smile bloomed across her face. "Maybe you could brush my hair sometimes, the way you did that first night, not touching but caring anyway." "I can do that." Days passed, sliding into weeks. The ranch work continued, but now there were stolen moments, a touch of hands over the water bucket, a kiss in the barn's shadows, long evenings sitting close on the porch as the stars emerged. Wade was true to his word about courting, though his version involved teaching her to shoot his rifle and showing her the hidden spring where wildflowers grew in profusion. The town's reaction to their obvious attachment was mixed. Adelaide Morrison sniffed and made comments about that kind of woman snaring a decent man, but others, like Tom Bradley and his wife, invited them both to Sunday dinner. Even Reverend Phillips, after some initial hesitation, agreed to put up the banns when Wade approached him. It was a cool evening in early October when Wade made his formal proposal. He'd been uncharacteristically nervous all day. fumbling with simple tasks, starting sentences and not finishing them. Lena watched with fond amusement, fairly certain she knew what was coming. After supper, he stood abruptly. "Walk with me." They strolled down to the corral where the horses dozed in the fading light. Wade stopped by the fence, cleared his throat. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, "about partnership and building something together, about how you've made this place a home. But standing here, all I can think is that I don't want to wake up another morning without knowing you'll be there, not as my housekeeper or my business partner, but as my wife." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple silver ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. It's not fancy, but it's real, like us." Lena looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. This man who'd seen her at her lowest and never wavered, who'd stood between her and the world's judgment, who'd given her space to heal and strength to fight. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. To the ranch, to the life, to you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, if you want." She laughed. "Let's give the town a little time to get used to the idea. Next month?" "Next month," he agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that lasted until the stars came out. Later, as they sat on the porch in their accustomed chairs, Lena held her hand up to catch the moonlight on the ring. "I never imagined this," she said softly. "When I was walking that trail, when I was hiding in those rocks, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see past the next sunrise. What do you see now?" She turned to look at him, this good man who'd become her anchor, her home, her future. "Everything," she said. "I see everything." Augustus chose that moment to leap into her lap, purring loudly and effectively ending the romantic moment. But as Lena laughed and Wade reached over to scratch the cat's ears, she thought perhaps this was romance enough this quiet evening, this simple touch, this promise of all the ordinary moments to come. In the desert beyond the ranch, a coyote called to its mate. The sound no longer frightened her. Nothing in the night could compare to what she'd already survived, and nothing in the darkness could dim the light she'd found here. "You've been my wife in every way but name," Wade said suddenly, echoing words he'd soon speak again. "Maybe it's time we fix that." "Past time," Lena agreed, and reached for his hand. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched her desperate flight months ago. But now they looked down on a woman transformed not by a man's love alone, but by her own courage to accept it, to believe she deserved it, to reach for happiness with both hands and hold on tight. Next month, she would stand before Reverend Phillips and speak vows that would bind her to this man, this land, this life. But in her heart, the ceremony had already happened that first night when he'd said, "You're not what's on you, you're what's in you." Every day since had been a choice to believe those words, to live them, to become them. The night deepened around them, peaceful and full of promise. Inside the cabin, water heated for evening washing. Simple, domestic rituals that now held profound meaning. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work on a ranch. But tonight, there was this two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, sitting quiet in the darkness, hands linked, hearts full. It was more than enough. It was everything. 3 years had passed since Wade Coulter found Lena McCall on that dusty Colorado trail. 3 years of seasons turning, of drought and plenty, of small miracles built day by day into a life neither had dared imagine. Lena stood before the mirror in their bedroom, brushing her hair with the same wooden comb that had once terrified her. The initials MC had worn even smoother under her fingers. Margaret Coulter's legacy living on in this simple morning ritual. Her hair fell in waves past her shoulders now, healthy and glossy, tended with care rather than shame. "Mama, can I help?" She smiled at the reflection of the small boy standing in the doorway, 2 years old, with Wade's steady eyes and her stubborn chin. They'd named him Samuel, after the man who'd saved Wade, continuing the chain of redemption that had brought them together. "Come here, sweet boy." She lifted him onto her lap, letting him hold the comb while she guided his chubby fingers through the motions. Gentle, like we practiced. Samuel's face screwed up in concentration as he worked. Behind them, she heard Wade's footsteps on the porch, returning from the morning chores. He paused in the doorway, and she caught his reflection smiling at the scene. "Don't let him pull," he said. "Boy's got a grip like a vice." "He's doing perfectly," Lena defended, pressing a kiss to Samuel's dark hair. "Aren't you, my love?" The child beamed and promptly tangled the comb in a knot. Lena laughed, the sound bright and unguarded in a way that still sometimes surprised her, that she could laugh so freely, love so openly, live so fully. These were gifts she'd never stopped being grateful for. Later, as Samuel napped and Wade worked on replacing boards in the barn, Lena found herself in the garden. It had tripled in size since that first year, now boasting neat rows of vegetables, a patch of herbs, and even a corner dedicated to flowers purely for beauty's sake. She knelt among the tomato plants, their branches heavy with late-season fruit, and thought about growth. The letter had come yesterday, delivered by the same boy who'd once brought news of the Pembertons' accusations. But this letter carried different tidings: an offer from a developer in Denver to buy their ranch for 3 times what it was worth. The railroad was coming through, and their land sat right in its path. They'd discussed it late into the night. The money would set them up for life. Let them buy a bigger place, maybe closer to town. Samuel could go to a proper school when the time came. They could have things easier. But easier had never been what they were after. Deep thoughts. Wade appeared beside her, dirt on his hands from the barn work. "Just thinking about that letter." He nodded, crouching to examine the tomatoes. "Tom Bradley says they made him the same offer. He's taking it." "I know." She sat back on her heels, studying her husband's profile. "Are we fools to refuse?" "Maybe." He plucked a ripe tomato, rubbed it clean on his shirt. "But this land gave us everything. Seems ungrateful to sell it off first chance we get." "That's what I thought too." She accepted half the tomato when he offered it, the warm juice sweet on her tongue. Besides, where else would Augustus lord over his kingdom? As if summoned. The orange cat, grayer now around his remaining ears, stalked through the garden rows with imperial dignity. He'd outlasted 3 dogs, countless barn cats, and one memorable encounter with a badger. Samuel toddled after him everywhere, and the cat tolerated it with the air of a king indulging a favored subject. "Supper's ready, Mama." The voice didn't belong to Samuel. He was still mastering Mama and Papa and Cat. This voice belonged to Emma, their foster daughter, standing on the porch with her hands on her hips in unconscious imitation of Lena. They'd taken Emma in 6 months ago when her parents died of fever, leaving her orphaned at 8 years old. The town had been ready to send her to an institution in Denver, but Lena had remembered another orphan, older but just as lost, and opened their home without hesitation. "We're coming, sweet girl," Lena called back. The kitchen was warm with the smell of stew and fresh bread. Emma had set the table with careful precision, each plate exactly aligned. She was like that, desperate to do everything right, to earn her place. Lena recognized the impulse, remembered it in herself. "This looks wonderful," she said, squeezing Emma's shoulder. "You're becoming quite the cook." The girl flushed with pleasure. "I added extra pepper like Mr. Wade likes." "She's got you figured out already," Lena teased as Wade washed his hands at the pump. "Smart girl," he agreed, ruffling Emma's hair as he passed. "Knows the way to a man's heart." They ate as a family. Samuel in his high chair cheerfully decorating himself with more food than he consumed. Emma chattering about the book she was reading, Wade and Lena sharing the comfortable communication of people who knew each other's thoughts without words. After supper, as was their custom, Wade brought out his guitar. He'd taken it up the previous winter, claiming his fingers needed something to do in the long evenings. He wasn't particularly talented, but the children didn't care. Emma sang along in her clear, sweet voice while Samuel clapped enthusiastically off-beat. Lena sat in her chair, the same one she'd claimed that first night as a guest, now worn to her shape and let the music wash over her. Through the window, she could see the stars beginning to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed her darkest hours and brightest joys. "Tell the story, Mama," Emma requested when the music ended. It had become a favorite bedtime ritual. "About how you and Papa met." So Lena told it, edited for young ears, the woman lost in the desert, the kind cowboy who shared his water, the barn that became a shelter and then a home. She left out the darker parts, the pain that had driven her to that desperate walk. Those truths would come later, when Emma was older, when the lesson about surviving cruelty and choosing love would mean more. "And then what?" Emma asked, though she knew the ending by heart. "And then they lived happily ever after." Samuel contributed, the words tumbling over each other in toddler fashion. "That's right," Wade said, scooping the boy into his arms. "Though it's more like happily ever after with a lot of work in between." "Work's not so bad when you're doing it together," Lena added, catching his eye over the children's heads. Later, after baths and bedtime stories and the ritual of tucking in, Wade and Lena found themselves on the porch as they did most evenings. The desert was alive with the night sounds, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of small creatures, the whisper of wind through sage. "Regrets?" Wade asked, taking her hand. "About what?" "Turning down the money, staying here when we could go somewhere easier." Lena considered this, running her thumb over the worn silver ring that hadn't left her finger in 3 years. No regrets." She turned to face him. "This place made us who we are. Samuel was born in that bedroom. Emma learned to smile again in that kitchen. We built a life here board by board, season by season. How do you put a price on that?" "You don't," Wade agreed. "You just hold on tight and keep building." From inside came the sound of footsteps. Emma, probably getting water. Soon she'd grow up, find her own path. Samuel would follow, as children did. The ranch would change. The world around it would change. But this moment, this peace, this profound gratitude for second chances and the courage to take them, this would remain. Lena stood, stretched, preparing for bed and another day of beautiful, ordinary life. As she moved past Wade's chair, he caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "What's that for?" she asked, smiling. "For saying yes 3 years ago and every day since." She bent to kiss him, this man who'd seen her true worth when she couldn't see it herself. "I'll keep saying it, long as you keep asking." Inside, she paused at the kitchen table where the wooden comb lay in its accustomed place. Such a simple object to have changed a life. But it hadn't been the comb, really. It had been the invitation it represented to care for herself, to believe she was worth caring for, to brush out the past and let something new grow in its place. From the children's room came the sound of Samuel calling for water. Emma's voice answered, patient and sweet, already the protective older sister. Lena smiled, moving to check on them, to perform the endless small tasks that made up a mother's day. Behind her, Wade extinguished the porch lamp and followed her inside. Augustus slipped through the door at the last moment, taking up his post at the foot of Samuel's bed. The house settled into nighttime quiet, full of breathing and dreams and the ineffable presence of love made manifest in daily choices. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. The garden to tend, meals to cook, children to raise, a ranch to run. But tonight there was this: a family gathered safe under one roof, a woman standing before a mirror without shame, a love story that had begun with "I'm filthy, don't touch me," and transformed into something beautiful beyond imagining. Lena unpinned her hair, reached for the comb. The movements were automatic now, soothing as prayer. In the mirror, She saw not the desperate woman from the trail or the broken servant from Kansas City, but simply herself wife, mother, survivor, thriver. Beautiful not because someone else had declared her so, but because she'd learned to hold her head high and claim her place in the world. "You're not what's on you," she whispered to her reflection. Wade's long ago words still a touchstone. "You're what's in you." And what was in her was love, resilience, and the hard-won knowledge that even the darkest paths could lead to light, if you just kept walking. Outside, the desert wind sang its ancient song. Inside, a family slept peaceful and safe, bound together by choice and chance and the everyday miracle of healing. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in Wade and Lena's journey. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage, hope, and second chances in America's frontier. Your support helps keep these stories alive.